Hey YouTube, this is Guy. Today on the review table we're going to take a look at and compare two different Casio G-Shock models. The Casio DW5600 on the left, which was previously reviewed, and I encourage you to check out that video, and on the right the Casio DW9052. Now these are both very similar G-Shock models, both in the roughly $40 to $50 price point, so extremely popular models because A, of their features, their durability, their reliability, and B, because of their price point. Now, these watches functionally are basically more or less the exact same. There is just a number of cosmetic differences, so we'll try to make, instead of a full feature-length review video of the not yet reviewed DW9052, kind of just do a quick little comparison of these two watches. So we'll jump right in here. Number one, both of these watches come in this, at least for me, this plastic Casio G-Shock box. This was for the 9052, obviously. There's the product number down on the bottom on the barcode. But both watches came in this same, cheap cardboard box. Nothing really special there. So we'll get that out of the way. And we'll take a closer look at both of these watches. Number one, again, like I had previously stated already, functionally these watches are more or less identical in that they both have the same four feature sets. Number one, they have timekeeping mode, which is what is currently on the dial right now on both of these watches. Your day, your date, your time, it's all right there. The other three modes that you have access to are going to be a alarm mode, a countdown alarm mode, and a stopwatch. I'll briefly go over each of those modes, but I don't want to basically do an instructional video because, again, this 5600 here, this was previously reviewed, and all of that stuff was covered in great detail. So if you want to know exactly how all of those functions work, I encourage you again to go check out that video. But I'll demonstrate on the 9052 here. So again, we're in timekeeping mode. You have four buttons here. On the top left, adjust would be your A, and then B on the top right, C on the bottom left, and D on the bottom right. A, B, C, D. And then you also have this G button here, which lights up your backlight, electroluminescent backlight. So that is one of the big differences between these two watches, is this fifth button here for the lighting feature. Again, so we're in timekeeping mode now. You can see you have the time on the bottom here. Up at the top you have the day and the month and the day date. If we hit the mode button, that takes us over to alarm mode. You can set an alarm here to go off daily, or a number of different options. You can do a daily alarm. You can do an alarm that's every day for a specific month, or you can do an alarm that goes off on every day of every month. For example, the first of every month, as opposed to every day in the month, if that makes sense. The next mode that you have is countdown alarm, and in this mode here, basically what you use this for is if you wanted to set an alarm to go off in, say, 30 minutes or whatever. I'm going to boil an egg in 7 minutes. I want the alarm to go off. I'm not even sure if 7 minutes is how long it takes to boil an egg. I can't cook. But regardless, you can set a countdown timer to go off here. And then your third mode is your stopwatch mode, which, functions how you would expect. Start and stop the stopwatch. There's nothing really surprising there. That's your four modes, and both of these watches have those exact same four modes. They display all of the exact same data on the dial or the face of the watch. It's really just the presentation of the case and a little bit of the strap is slightly different, and the dial layout. That is the differences on these watches. Again, functionally, they're more or less the same. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom the camera in here a little bit tighter so that we can, in particular, look at the dial a little bit closer on these watches and show you guys the differences as far as the different layout and design features, for lack of a better word. So give me 1 sec to zoom in the camera. I should probably make it clear right off the bat that I much prefer the the design and the aesthetic of the watch on the left much more, that's the DW5600, than the watch on the right. And that's not to say that I don't think that the 9052 is a bad watch in any way. It's just there's a lot of things about the design that I just don't favor in comparison to this 5600. The 5600 is honestly one of my favorite watches, so I'm going to be a little bit biased here, unfortunately. So if you disagree with me, if you own this 9052 and you're like, oh, that's the best watch ever, I love that watch, it is a good watch, don't get me wrong. I just prefer the design and overall look and feel of this watch on the left here. But here's some of the reasons why. Number one, let's talk about the case. You can see that the 5600 on the left has a very typical, sort of classic designed square Casio square case. And size-wise, if we look at the overall width here, we're looking at about 44 millimeters in that ballpark. It is a little bit on the big side. Actually, what's more important to compare is the thickness. On this watch, we're looking at about 12.5 millimeters. Let's take a look at the 9052. The overall width, I don't know, we'll do it from these buttons. 46.5, basically, so quite a bit bigger overall diameter. And then the thickness is also quite a bit thicker. This is about 13 millimeters thick. No, I'm sorry, 16. I apparently can't count. 16 millimeters here on the 9052. And what did we say here it was? About 12 and a half? Yeah, about 12 and a half. So 3.5, maybe 4 millimeters thicker on the 9052. And if we look at them side by side, I mean, it shows. Is there a good way to display this? Here we go. This G-Shock, the 9052, the one on the bottom here, it is substantially thicker. So when you're wearing it on the wrist, you really know it's there. It is standing off your wrist. You're prone to probably bang it into walls and doorknobs and everything else just because of how much thicker it is than the 5600. That's probably one of the main reasons why I prefer the 5600. The watch on the left. It's just more low profile. Overall, the diameter of the watch, the size of the case on your wrist is a little bit smaller. Not a ton, but a little bit smaller. I find that this 9052, the watch on the right, to just be a little oversized for me. And that's going to be super common with any of the G-Shock models. I mean, most of them are at least this big, right? So I'm not sure if I could reasonably find another G-Shock model that I like as much as this 5600, just for the overall size. And now a lot of people are going to complain that this G-Shock 5600 on the left here, they're going to complain that that's too big. I think that it wears quite well on my wrist personally. But if you don't like the size of it, I can't fault you. I mean, it's large. It's just not too big for me. Now, another thing that I greatly prefer on the 5600 is just the dial layout. If we look here, and it's probably going to be hard to see on a camera, number one, the numerals. Everything is a little bit bigger on the watch on the left, on the DW5600. The time numerals are just a little bit bigger. The day up on the top left on both of these watches, Saturday. On the watch on the left, it's just, again, a little bit bigger, a little bit more legible. Same with the date, June 3rd. A little bit bigger and a little bit more legible on the DW5600 on the left. You can see that on both of these watches, I have the hourly chime alarm turned on. That's the little bell in the top left corner next to the day. It's much easier to see. It's much clearer and more legible, again, on the watch on the left, the DW5600, than it is on the DW9052. And again, it's in PM right now. That is just below that little bell on the watch on the left. On the watch on the right, it's just this little P right here all the way over on the side of the screen. Everything's just a little bit more legible. The reason why that is because on the watch on the right, on the DW9052, you have these two extra little scales or meters. You see that I'm going to set this one down. You see that there's this little scale right here. It's ticking across the screen. That's counting your running seconds. And then there's this circle, and that's counting every 10 seconds. It's filling up a little chunk of the pie. So once we get to 10 seconds here, it's going to fill up that little chunk. And then your little meter going across the front here is counting down, 15, 16, 17, 18, and then it's going to fill up the 20 slice of the pie there. Now, that's taking up so much room on the dial that it's forcing everything else to have to be a little bit smaller, making everything slightly less legible. Here's the problem with that. Now, some people might think like, oh, I like these little gizmos. I think it looks cool. If you just think it's cool looking, that's fine. You know what I mean? Like, totally up to you. There's a YouTuber that I watched that has this concept called second kind of cool. The first kind of cool is like stuff that's actually useful and functional and actually makes it really good quality. Second kind of cool is just stuff that you enjoy, that you like, that turns you on. So if you're going to say like, oh, I just like those features because it's second kind of cool, that's fine. Again, like, you're entitled to have your opinion there. But for me, I find that both of those little scales are absolutely 100% useless. I'm never going to look down at my watch and like ignore the time and be like, oh, it's 7, 8 seconds, 9 seconds. Oh, no, wait, I got to look at this little pie. It's actually 21, 22. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not going to read time at all. I'm never going to use these little doodads. They serve no purpose for me. It's just only there for visual interest, in my opinion. And if you find it visually interesting, again, second type of cool, that's fine. You're entitled to your opinion. However, for me, I find that all it does is take up space on the dial and force everything else to have to be smaller. So that's one knock that I have against the DW9052. It's an incredibly popular watch, though. I mean, thousands of reviews on Amazon. People like it, as well as people like the DW5600. You know what I mean? It's not like this is unpopular. But I'm probably not in the majority when I say that I don't like having these little dials and scales and stuff on the face of the watch. But, you know, I'm here to give you my opinions about what I think regarding these products, and I find that to be a negative. On another negative, I feel like, well, we talked about the sizing as a negative. We talked about these little gizmos and the overall legibility of the dial being a little worse. The strap, I guess, the band. I think the band on the 5600 is a little bit better. I mean, they're basically the same thing. They're both Casio's resin material. I just like that this has this little inlay. Like, if I'm going to have some sort of second type of cool design feature that adds visual interest and not anything functionally, I like how this strap is kind of grooved out here. It's not better per se. It's just more interesting to me. I like that. Again, this is just completely subjective and personal opinions, so you could disagree with me. You could say I like this kind of plain, no nonsense strap on the 9052 better. That's cool, but for me, I prefer the strap of the 5600, though I accept or acknowledge that they're actually not physically better or worse than one another. It's just entirely an opinion. One thing that is nice about the strap on the 9052 here, it actually is hinged, so you could lay the watch flat, right? On the 5600, there's not an actual like spring bar hinge. It always wants to retain its shape, so it would be impossible to like lay this watch down flat. It's always trying to maintain this circular wrist shape, basically. So that is one thing that's cooler about the strap. If we look at the undersides, the strap also has these little, I don't know what you call these, bars or something. It's not exactly the same on the back side of the 5600. No real preference either way as far as that's concerned, other than I guess that this adds kind of a little bit of bulk, which may or may not be necessary. There's just compare and contrast the differences of these two straps is all I'm really doing here, I guess. And saying that I prefer the strap of the watch on the left, the DW5600. Things about the 9052 that I like that it has a dedicated light button here, so I can just push this light button, the G button here on the bottom, very easily, and it turns on the electroluminescence backlight. By comparison, the light button is one of these little tiny buttons on the side on the 5600. And, they're a little bit more difficult to push, particularly when the watch is on your wrist. However, that's not a big deal. It wouldn't be a decision maker for me as far as which watch I would pick over the other. But I do acknowledge that having this button here is more convenient and probably preferable for most people. It's nice and accessible. The overall, going back to the case real quick, this circle-ish on the right versus the square-ish case on the left, I just prefer the square look. It's more of this like 1980s aesthetic that I maybe early 90s, I'm not sure, but it's got this aesthetic that I just prefer. Again, with these little extra large, I don't even know what this piece is called here. It wraps around the back of the watch, and then you have these studs coming off the sides. Like, it just adds a lot of unnecessary bulk. Now, this watch, the 9052, does have better buttons, speaking of the buttons, which we touched on briefly. Again, we just have these like little metal stud buttons, the 4 here on the 5600. In particular, the adjust button on the top left is recessed and even harder to actuate. On this watch, the buttons are these nice, very easy to actuate plastic buttons, so you can just, if we hold in, I believe it's the start-stop button, it turns on the function there to make the screen flash with the alarm. It's just easier to get to and actuate these buttons than it is on this watch. You kind of use the tip of your fingernail, and it's not impossible. Same functionality on both of these watches. That little icon shows up there to indicate that you have the hourly or the alarm flash, screen light flash feature turned on. But the buttons, on the 5600, they're more aesthetically pleasing in my opinion because they're lower profile. They're not like out there like this. Again, it has these huge little. That's sort of contradictory. These huge, containers or they're almost like. It's almost like a crown protector that you would have on an analog watch. Anyway, it's like this big chunk of the case is surrounding your buttons here. So it adds all of this other bulk and dimensions to the case that I just don't really want. You know what I mean? This is just nice and sleek, and it's just a little bit more trim and of a package. You know what I mean? Other than, the buttons being a big difference, that kind of, in a way, goes in favor of the 9052. There's not a lot different about these watches. Weight-wise, I didn't throw them on a scale. I probably should have. I have a little, kitchen scale. I could have weighed them. But in the hand, I can't really tell a difference between them weight-wise. But because this watch is just bigger and bulkier, it's definitely more noticeable. It doesn't really, disappear on your wrist and you forget about it as easily as you do this G-Shock. So anyway, what we have here are two G-Shocks with more or less the exact same feature sets in the same price bracket. Which would you pick? For me, I'm picking, again, this watch on the left, the DW5600. Tell me down in the comments, though, which you guys would pick if you were going to take either one of these. Again, it's the DW5600 or the DW9052. I'm curious to see if more people prefer one over the other. But for my money, I would, if I was only going to buy one digital G-Shock watch of these two, I would be going with the one on the left. I'd be going with the DW5600, the super classic, quintessential Casio G-Shock design. Otherwise, there's not many other differences. Case backs, they're more or less the same. They might be identical, as a matter of fact. I think they pretty much are. The straps, basically the same, with the exception, again, of kind of just some styling differences. It is what it is. They're G-Shocks. They're different models. They do have different modules that control the brains of the watches, but for whatever reason, they have basically the same feature set again. But yeah, that's it. That's all I really wanted to do, was go over the two watches here, do a little compare and contrast. I didn't think that I needed to do a complete single watch review of the 9052 just because it does the same thing as the 5600, and I previously reviewed that. But I thought it might be worthwhile to show them side by side and to illustrate the differences of these two watches. If you're interested in either one of these, in the notes below this video, I will have links to it on Amazon. If you purchase it through these links, it gives me a small commission, helps out the channel, helps some money come in that I can use to buy new stuff to do videos on, so I appreciate that. Also down there's links to my social media accounts, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and as well as my Patreon if you want to subscribe there and become a Patreon to the channel. That would also be appreciated. Alright guys, I'm going to sign off. This probably went about a few minutes longer than I really anticipated, honestly. But I appreciate you guys if you stuck around to the end, listening in and watching the whole video. All right, we will be back next week with, I don't know, something a little different. All right, guys, bye.